Now, China and Russia have become closer in recent years with President Xi and President Putin. But how much is China really supporting Russia in Ukraine? For example, is China sending weapons?
China is always very much balanced. From day one, China has been calling for ceasefire. And China has worked with both Russia and Ukraine. And China has appointed a special envoy, making the road to different capital cities, talking about the Chinese version of the peace plan. I think China
I understand that, but just to clarify, China is not sending weapons for Russia to use in Ukraine.
Absolutely not. If I may...
Okay. Can I just go on? We've got quite a bit of ground to cover. Let me stick with this theme and ask you this. We seem to have been having a little problem with your connection there. Do you approve, or does China approve of North Korean troops being deployed in Ukraine?
It is purely between... the Russian government has said that whatever that's happening between DPRK and Russia is within the international law framework. So let's wait and see to see what exactly will happen. Now, on the other hand, I'm personally opposed to any which will continue the war rather than pooling the resources in the world to end the war as quickly as possible. I think this war and the continuation of the war is in the very much of a danger and detriment to the interest of the European countries, to the people in the world, including to China. And we need to do whatever we can to bring the war to an end, rather than pouring more fuel onto the fire and extend it indefinitely.
If Presidents Xi and Putin are such good friends these days, why has China not recognized Russia's annexation of Crimea?
China's position is very clear. China fully respects Ukraine as a member of the United Nations, and China believes the United Nations Charter fully applies to Ukraine. Therefore, China has never taken any step at all, in whatever shape or form, to recognize the loss of Ukraine or the eastern four provinces of Ukraine to Russia. Meaning, China is not taking a view to support Russia's annexation, if you use that word, of any territory of Ukraine by Russia. That means China is really taking the right side. China does not take a view on the annexation. China does not support the annexation, and China does not provide weapons to either Ukraine or Russia. And China is calling for peaceful means to solve this war between Russia and Ukraine. And China is calling on any other country to stop sending more weapons to Ukraine, because the weapons will not solve the problem. It will either extend the war or push the war into escalation from conventional war into nuclear war. Eventually, for example, if nuclear disaster breaks out, all of us, 8 billion people, will be direct victims of this war. We do not want to see that. We want to see Russia and Ukraine sit down, and China is willing to provide good offices. I think China will be very happy to invite the Russian delegate and the Ukrainian delegate to China to lock themselves into a room to talk, and whatever they can come up with to narrow their differences and eventually achieve a solution of their war, that will be the best outcome.
China, I think, would like President Putin to stop threatening to use nuclear weapons, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. China has talked to Russia again and again about the futility of using the nuclear weapon and about the absolute need not to use the nuclear weapon. But China cannot dictate anything to Russia.
Of course.
And Russia, as a sovereign country, will decide by itself as to what it needs to do to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. From the Chinese perspective, you cannot use the nuclear bomb. If you drop one nuclear bomb, it will trigger a chain effect. Eventually, all the bombs will be used, and the world we understand will be destroyed, and mankind either will be destroyed in the nuclear attacks or will perish in the subsequent nuclear winter. Therefore, we call on Russia not to use the bomb, but we also call on Russia and Ukraine to use whatever means they can find to enter into negotiation to end the war. And China is opposed to what NATO is doing, sending weapons again and again and again and escalating the level of the weaponry sent to Ukraine to continue the war, because we believe if this war is not brought to an end, and if this war is continued, it will escalate into a nuclear holocaust.
NATO wouldn't be sending weapons to Ukraine, Mr. Gao, if Russia hadn't invaded Ukraine in an unprovoked and illegal manner.
Well, allow me to use one very quick example. Back in 1962, the former Soviet Union wanted to deploy missiles in Cuba. No one denied that Soviet Union was a sovereign independent country. Cuba was a sovereign independent country. And why should President Kennedy jump out of the seat and vehemently oppose the proposed deployment of Soviet missiles in Cuba? And why should President Kennedy be hailed as one of the greatest presidents in the U.S. history? Because he stood firm. He made decisions which eventually discontinued the Soviet Union's deployment of missiles in Cuba. Now, why shouldn't anyone in NATO really care about some of these legitimate concerns on Russia's part? Because you simply cannot push the border of NATO to Russia's doorstep, especially after making all these promises of not pushing NATO to the doorstep of Russia. We
Ukraine
do not
not a member of
agree
NATO.
with Russia, but you at least need to understand why Russia acted as it is in firmly opposing the expansion of NATO into Ukraine.
So let me go straight to the question I just asked. At the BRICS summit, what was achieved?
Well, the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia, is a great success and a milestone in terms of increasing the solidarity among the 10 BRICS member states, and also laying out the roadmap for additional things that the BRICS organization need to do, especially in the settlement, payment, or even possibly a BRICS currency, for example. They also talked about digital payment using a collective kind of currency unit for all the 10 BRICS member states. Now, please keep in mind, if you look at the 10 member states of the BRICS, there are important energy producers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Russia and China too, but also important energy importing countries like China. So you're talking about a group of 10 countries which have complementarity in terms of the supply and demand of energy, oil and natural gas, you name it. And further, there are about 24 other countries very eager to explore possibilities of joining BRICS, including, amazingly, Turkey, which is a NATO member state, which has been spurned away from EU for decades. And now Turkey seems to have made up its mind to join BRICS organization. And I will not be surprised if Turkey will be the first country to join BRICS after the expansion of the membership last year. Now, what does
Would
this
it have
mean?
to leave? Would it have to leave NATO to join BRICS?
I don't think so. I think BRICS itself is not a defense organization or military organization. It is not committed to Cold War, for example. It is open-minded and is focused on economic development, integration, for example, connectivity. And I think whether you are a NATO member or not, it's open-minded. I personally will not be surprised if eventually Mexico will want to join BRICS. Don't be surprised if eventually down the road, Mexico will make a formal application. So BRICS is an organization for the future, and it is really a very strong, dynamic, new organization in the world.
The purpose, you mentioned this new financial payment system, which has been devised, mooted by Russia, and it was discussed at the BRICS summit. It's a system in a way that's designed to try and distance these countries from the dollar payment system, from the dollar power that America gets, including for the use of sanctions that it can use against countries that use dollars. Is the BRICS aim, in your view, to replace the dollar, to find a way of replacing the dollar as the international currency?
Not at all. I personally do not support the de-dollarization campaign. However, I think BRICS countries and other countries which want to join BRICS are truly worried and concerned about weaponizing dollar or weaponizing SWIFT system. For us, dollar and SWIFT are just like public goods. You can just use it and no one should stand in the way of weaponizing dollar or pound or euro or SWIFT system, for example. However, if there is one country, very big country, and other countries which are bent upon weaponizing dollar, of course you will have consequences. That is, you raise the alarm and you actually force countries like the BRICS member states to think about alternative ways. And these alternatives are not de-dollarization. It is basically safeguarding their sovereign right to use dollar or pound or euro or whichever currency, which should be considered as public good. And if you deny them the access to the dollar or the SWIFT system, they need to come up with their alternative. And I think the discussion within the BRICS organization is very in-depth. Whether they will be able to come up with a framework anytime soon, that's not certain, but I'm pretty sure they are moving in that direction.